And there's new information out today on what Canadians are saying about the anti-pipeline blockades and the way the Prime Minister has handled the situation, and more information about the whole situation and how we got here. In fact, let's bring in Shachi Kurl from the Angus Reid Institute. She joins me from Toronto. Shachi Kurl, good to see you again. Thanks for taking time to speak with me.
Thanks for having me, Peter, as always.
First of all, tell me about this latest survey of Canadians, when it was done and how it was done.
So we are fresh out of field. We were in field up until yesterday, popped it out this morning, and fielded basically between Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, very fresh numbers. Spoke to a representative sample of Canadians, 1,500 from coast to coast in both official languages, talking to people in every age group, demographic, and the usual census demographic cuts.
All right, let's talk about the findings. When asked about the options for handling these blockades, patience and dialogue versus use of force, where do Canadians come down?
Well, Canadians are, they're pretty split, Peter. Almost 50-50, but not quite. Slightly more are of the view that we should be looking to get these blockades down and force injunctions where necessary. Of course, we're down to, I believe, just one blockade remaining at this stage. But even then, about half the country saying, get rid of the blockades, the other half saying, go slowly, slowly, have patience, deal with this through dialogue and negotiation. And
there's an interesting demographic here, a split in those numbers, older men versus younger women, and how they see this differently. Tell me about that.
Absolutely. So look, this cuts so many different ways, and what it really speaks to, because it's an easy finding to say, well, Canadians are divided or Canadians are split, but it's really about who's split. And it's not as though people in this country are split evenly among themselves. You have certain parts and certain cuts of the population who feel very strongly on one hand, and other parts of the population who feel very, very strongly on the other hand. So if you are someone who looks at this through the lens of the economy or law and order, you tend to skew a little bit older in age, more likely to be over the age of 55, more likely to be male, more likely to be a past conservative voter, and more likely to have a slightly higher income. You're more likely to also say, you know what, get those blockades down. On the other hand, younger women, people living in cities, those with lower incomes but higher levels of education, basically those who tend to skew more to the left of center, voted for the NDP, maybe the Liberals in the last election, they're much more likely to say, hey, let's all take a breath here.
And how do Canadians view this conflict? Is it about the economy and the rule of law, or is it about Indigenous rights and the environment?
Okay, so again, you have basically Canadians cut in half on this issue. Half of them say that they see it either as an issue that is primarily viewed through the lens of the economy and the impact on the economy, or through a law and order lens. Look, you may disagree with the pipeline existing, but you can't erect blockades, you can't block ports, you can't block rail lines. Or on the other half, and this is where that older man, younger woman split comes along. This is where you start to see regional splits as well. This is where people either see this issue and this conflict primarily through the lens of Indigenous rights or through the lens of climate change and the environment.
Let's talk about the Prime Minister and how he's handled this situation. What did you find in this survey of Canadians?
Well, you know what? The Prime Minister is getting it from all sides on this one. He is widely seen to be doing a bad job on this issue. Just about 1 in 5 say he's doing a good job. That's largely drawn from his own Liberal base, people who voted for the Liberal Party in the last election. But Peter, only 3%, which is basically statistic decimal dust, say that he's done a very good job. And when you look at those past Liberal voters, very few of them think that he's done a very good job. So this is a sense and a case where people who are saying he's doing a good job are wanting to stay loyal to their guy. But really, conservative voters, conservatives furious with his performance on this issue. New Democrats, people on the left of center, Bloc voters also furious with him on this issue.
Okay, let's move to it's been a singular feature of the Prime Minister's time in office, reconciliation, a guiding principle for the Liberal government and the Prime Minister. What are Canadians saying about how this situation affects that process?
You know, we've talked about how much division there is in the country around these issues. There are a couple of questions on which we find some consensus, but again, from different sides of the equation or different points of view. 80% of Canadians say that this has done nothing to help reconciliation. Indeed, it has harmed reconciliation. The viewpoint of those who see this through the lens of Indigenous rights, overwhelmingly of the view that the blockades have been, and the dismantling of them, the arrests have been an affront to the reconciliation process. And those on the right of center, those seeing it through the lens of law and order, saying, no, of course reconciliation hasn't been helped, because indeed there are members of First Nations, there are Indigenous communities in British Columbia who actually support the pipeline as well, and they're of the view that reconciliation's been harmed because those particular members of First Nations say that they're not, you know, by virtue of these blockades, what they wish for is being stymied or blocked.
Okay, so as we have these meetings between ministers and the Wet'suwet'en and hereditary chiefs, one of the big questions is who speaks for the First Nations peoples in that territory? Who should have the final say? Some of the hereditary chiefs opposed to the gas pipeline, or the elected band councils who all support it. Where are Canadians on that question?
Well, there isn't a majority view on this question, but a plurality. 45% actually say that it is the elected band councils who should have the say and who should be the people who speak for the Wet'suwet'en on this issue. Now, that's followed by about 30% of Canadians who say it should be both, and about 9% who say it's the hereditary chiefs. Again, Peter, the splits on this are so profound, because that 45% who say that it should be the elected band councils, the 45% who say that it should be elected band councils, are predominantly on the right side of the political spectrum, who are looking at this going, yes, if there are elected band councils who support this, as the majority do, let them speak for this. On the other side of the equation, people who look at this through the lens of Indigenous rights are actually split. The same number say the hereditary chiefs as say the elected band councils, and so that is what is driving that top line result.
All right, let's finish on this, and that's the question of overall support for the Coastal GasLink pipeline project. What's happened to support for the project since these blockades went up?
You know, we did our first survey on this a couple of weeks ago, and at the time I said the needle is going to move. Where the needle is on support today is not where it's going to be in the next couple of weeks, depending on what happens with these blockades. In the last 2 weeks, what we've seen is this. Support for the pipeline itself has ticked up about 10 points. Why? Couple of things. Personal proximity to being disrupted or put out by the blockades. If you're someone who had a train canceled, lost a job at the port, or because via freight wasn't getting through, if you're someone who was dealing with a bridge blockade or stuck on a GO commuter train who couldn't get home to their families, chances are your tolerance for this is much lower, and your support for the project in turn ticks up. But here's another thing. The level of awareness of this project is not where it was 2 weeks ago. Indeed, as more people learn about it, that is another driver of why we're starting to see a little bit of support tick up for it.
All right, interesting findings as always. Shachi Kurl from the Angus Reid Institute. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Peter.